Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Heat Dome and the longest day of the year. My name is Mark Mamagonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs here at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NAASR, and thank you for making time in your day to be with us, whether in person or online. Tonight's event, well, we're starting a little bit earlier than we usually do because we anticipated that tonight might be Game 6 of the NBA Finals and that people might want to get home early to watch the Celtics win in 6 games. But they took care of business in 5 games. So I realize people who are watching online in other parts of the country can't possibly care, but we're very happy about it here in Boston. So nevertheless, thank you for being with us. Tonight's program is being presented by the NAASR Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues and the First Armenian Church of Belmont, our across-the-street neighbors and friends, and in association with the Angel Investor Club of Armenia, AICA, Armtech Boston, the American University of Armenia's Entrepreneurship and Product Innovation Center, AUA EPIC, and Equify. And in particular, I want to acknowledge and thank the Gulbenkian Foundation for their continued support of our contemporary issues programming over the past many years. And I also want to thank Berj Ayvazian and Professor Michael Kushakjian for their efforts in making this program happen tonight. There's a great deal of concern, regardless of where one falls on whatever political spectrum, about current conditions in Armenia. We're going to set aside geopolitics for the most part tonight, I think, anyway, to bring forward a subject that has occasionally been looked at over the past decade or so within these contemporary issues programs we've held, namely the Armenian economy, but tonight with a specific focus on the high-tech sector in Armenia. And our speaker tonight is Samson Avetian. Samson is a graduate of Harvard Business School, Gothenburg School of Business, and Stockholm University in Sweden, and the author of Armenia's Economy, the Next 25 Years. He is the CEO of Equify, a university research-born initiative which has been supported by AUA and by the ICMPD European Union. I should know what that stands for, but I don't. And he is the co-founder of Angel Investor Club of Armenia. Samson also contributes to outlets such as CivilNet, EVN Report, How To Be, Radio 106.5, Rearrange, Forbes Armenia, and Benzinga, among others. He's an invited professor at AUA since 2015, and he repatriated to Armenia in 2010. As ever, when we are doing these hybrid events, if you're watching on Zoom, please use the Zoom Q&A function to submit your questions, and we will get to them after his presentation. And for those of you in the room would like to ask any questions, please saunter up to the front of the room, speak into the microphone, because otherwise the people online just hear nothing and they get angry, and we don't want angry people. Please now welcome Mr. Samson Avetian. Samson.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks everyone for joining online and in person. It's nice to you, nice to be here, and thanks a lot to NAASR and Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, of course, the First Armenian Church. Our agenda is as follows. I have it on the next slide. I'll try to take the questions in between as well, so if you have any questions, feel free, if that's okay, obviously. I'll try to keep the answer short. But there's a lot of stuff to go through, a lot of information. I hope this will be as insightful as possible to you. So what we're going to start is we're going to talk about something that I wrote maybe, I don't know, 5-7 years ago or so. There was a lot of research done on Armenia and basically comparative analysis of it, comparing to other countries. So what do we have, where have we come in these last 25 years, and what's the outlook basically, and what do we do with that? So there were more than 20 countries studied, benchmarked, a lot of economic metrics, and it was always a kind of a long-term approach, not like 5 years what's going to happen with the GDP next year and so on, but more kind of a long-term structural issues. And there's also one scenario that would describe, okay, what does need to happen for Armenia to have a sustainable, secure, and kind of prosperous future. And there's also going to be a kind of a section on, okay, what do we do about it and how can we help with whatever initiatives we're doing. So we're going to talk a bit about that too. So to start, Mark mentioned a couple of things about my background, so let's just start and go through the issues. So this is basically since 1990 where we are on GDP. GDP is basically economic output of different nations and where Armenia stands. So there's not a lot of, I mean, the charts are pointing upwards for all of these countries, for example, these 5 here. I think the next slide is a bit more interesting. Now let me ask you a question. How do you think Armenia did compared to other countries when it comes to economic output per person, standards of living per person? Did we do better than other countries or did we do worse? So if you compare relatively speaking, how do you think that worked out? Do we think that we did better as Armenia versus countries like this or worse? Any guesses? Perch is on a pessimistic side today. Other ideas? Better or worse? Better? Okay. Why? Why better?
Armenians are innovative in our country, and they always have ingenious ways of starting business or taking risk.
Okay. So the answer basically, Armenia is kind of taking risks, doing business, and basically come out a bit better than, relatively speaking, in other countries. So this next slide should be fairly illustrating on this. So what we did, or what I did, this is basically GDP per capita on the line chart. So this is GDP per person. So output per person, standards of living per person for Armenia versus other countries. More importantly, and I guess more interesting, is the GDP per person relatively speaking to other countries. So we have countries like Russia, Estonia, Georgia, Bulgaria, US, and 1990, 1995, and 2022. So let me describe this as easily as possible. So in 1990, if a US person was making 100% in output, $100 in output, an Armenian person made 3%, so $3. So US making $3, Armenia, US making $100, Armenia $3. In 2022, US is making $100 a person, Armenia is making $9. And the same thing with other countries. So relatively speaking to every single country listed here, we did much better. So we did 3 times better in US case, 3 times better Russia, Estonia. If you look at Georgia numbers, Armenians made $40, Georgians made $100. Now we're making $105, Georgians are making $100. So we did basically fairly well, so that's good. What else can we say about this? So the ingenuity, the risk-taking, the business side, I guess it worked out fairly positively. But obviously, we have a lot of issues to deal with, and there are still structural weaknesses. I would say the reason why we did better, probably diaspora had a huge part in this, helping out. Whatever initiatives we're seeing in the slides, whether this is AICA, Equify, where a lot of people from abroad that are involved in helping out and supporting Armenia, and I know you're doing probably a lot yourselves as well. But there are also a lot of things still to improve, and that's why it's structural weaknesses and gaps, and let's talk a bit about those as well, so we kind of stay realistic. So one of the things that's very important is investments. And compared to other countries in the world, Armenia is country number 134. So if we rank all of these countries together, as a percent of GDP, we're country number 134. So these are all the countries, and the bar that is red, basically here, is where Armenia is. And by the way, this is aided a lot by diaspora inflows and by the construction sector. Another thing that's interesting to look at is the consumption side. So we're country number 27 on consumption. So Armenia as an economy is very, very consumption oriented. People spend a lot of money out of their income on consumption. Why is that important? Why is consumption important?
The more you spend, the less you have to invest.
Yes, exactly. So basically income goes in 2 places. One is consumption, the other one is investments. Okay, so we're consuming a lot, and we're country number 27. Obviously, there's less money to go on investment. So this is country number 27, Armenia, basically the bar chart over there to the left. And by the way, a lot of the investments that we have is also construction oriented. And when it comes to saving, we're country number 149. So of all the 180 countries, we're saving very little, so we're country number 149. So we're kind of over there. And basically the logic is the following. Savings leads to investment, leads to the future. And we need to invest a lot. That means we need to save a lot. Why do we Armenians save much less than the average country in the world? Why would that be the case? Any ideas? We have a couple of hypotheses ourselves, but I would like to hear your thoughts about this as well. Any idea?
Per capita income is low to begin with, but I don't think that's an accurate measure myself, because if you read a book that was written in 1919, among the new immigrant groups, Armenians were the second highest savers.
In U.S.
U.S. immigration.
Yeah, okay. So the one hypothesis here that the reason, so Armenians when they arrived to U.S. they saved a lot, and there was second group, so to say, the ranking there. What are the reasons that in Armenia proper that we might be not that good at saving? What do you think? Yeah?
I think there's a lot of poor people in Armenia.
Okay, so there's a common answer that we get. We don't save much because our incomes are low. Savings does not correlate with income. You have a lot of countries that have much lower GDP per capita, much lower income per person, but have much higher savings rates. So China has a savings rate of 40% approximately, has had it for like 2 decades or so. A lot of Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries have very high savings rate, Taiwan, South Korea, and all of these countries. So it's usually not correlated with income. Countries in the same income level can have very, very different savings rates. But these savings rates do impact how much investment that happens. Because the more you save, the lower the interest rates are in the economy, more supply of money, and much more investment. So that's the kind of the easiest way to kind of describe it. Another reason that we hear why Armenians save little is because of a lot of people lost their savings after the Soviet breakup. A lot of people had savings in the banks, and then everything got lost. That's maybe a fair thing to say. On the other hand, in Armenia for the last 20, 25 years, no single bank has gotten bankrupt, or many have gotten bankrupt in Western countries, in US, and many other places in the world. So we did actually know the numbers. There were like 15 banks in France, 14 banks in UK, Japan, I think 1,000 banks in US that got bankrupt during that period. But anyway, in any case, retail people usually don't lose money in these cases, neither, unless you have an account with Lehman Brothers or something like that. Anyhow, it's also important to understand that when you have a lot of consumption in Armenia or in any country, and you produce less, there becomes a gap. It's like going to the store trying to buy something, but you don't have the dollars for it. And what happens is, there are a couple of ways you can actually address this. And that's what we have done for many years. It's gotten a bit better recently, but if you have I'll try to use my hands and do the mic. So if our consumption is at this level, and our production at this level, there's a gap between the two. So how do we close the gap continuously? There are a couple of ways that you do it as a country. Sale of domestic assets is one. External debt, you borrow from abroad, and you use the money to consume. And the labor exports that also happen. So this is not a typical Armenia issue. A lot of countries have this issue. A lot of developing countries have gone through the same road. So when this research was done, it was also kind of to look at, okay, what happens afterwards? And this is basically the balance sheet of Armenia. So how much assets? So when you do have a lot of consumption, that ends up on your balance sheet. Like if you're a household, if you overconsume, you have a credit card debt. As a country, if you overconsume, you get a lot of assets that are not owned internally by the foreigners. In any case, we're going to switch back to a bit of a more positive outlook. And then comes the next question: how do small countries become successful? And the emphasis is a bit on small, just because what are the issues with small countries? Why are small countries a bit more kind of challenged, so to say? Why is it more important? Yeah.
Less manpower.
Like labor force, right? Okay, so one issue is the less labor force that a country has. Why is that important? Why is the low labor force important? Fewer people than, I don't know, 3 million instead of 35 million.
If there's a lower supply of labor, it can be more expensive.
Yeah, so it comes to the expensive side. If you have a small market, if you have 3 million people that are buying the products, if you're selling these computers, you need to produce for 3 million. And obviously the economies of scale do not happen, so your cost of production is very high. So small countries need to be very, very export-oriented. A strong export sector is a must for several reasons, because you export these computers, volumes, economies of scale, cheap production, and so on. So that's one important thing. Another thing on the bullet point number 1, we need a lot of, as a small country, you usually need a lot of imports, resources, energy, metals, whatever it might be. That's another thing. The mass production I mentioned, so in essence, the export side is a very, very important for any small country. Any small successful countries you know, Singapore, Switzerland, Estonia, all of these countries have very strong export-oriented economies. In Armenia's case, and I mentioned it's a bit more consumption heavy. So the next slide talks about, okay, we have the situation, we have the context, how do we get out of it? So how do we close this gap? If this is the consumption, this is the production, there are a couple of ways to close the gap. What would those be? How do we close the gap between production and consumption? Obviously, we can consume less. Do people like consuming less? No, they usually don't. So most of the time, countries can do a couple of things. You can raise the taxes so you save more. Yeah, but most of the time, what you rather do is to work on the production side. So to close the gap, you work on the production. So next question becomes, okay, so what do we produce? What does the chart say? Any takers on this? So if we have limited amount of people, these people need to produce as much as possible, right? So what can we produce to produce as much as possible? So we have a couple of things here. We have the IT, we have finance, manufacturing, and all the other sectors. And at the end, it comes to agriculture and tourism. So every person, every labor hour can produce a certain amount of output. So if you want to close the gap easily, you want to producing a lot per hour, as much as possible per hour. And the highest value add sector in developed countries, developing countries, this is the IT and tech. The other one is obviously finance, but it would be very kind of leap of imagination to assume Armenia will become a Switzerland or a London or a New York, just because of the geopolitics and the risks associated with it. So if you want as a country to produce as much as possible, use your limited amount of resources as well as possible, looking at the statistics, what sectors are the most output intensive, like produce a lot of dollars per hour, that's IT and tech. So, and if you work instead on putting a lot of people in the other sectors on this side, obviously you're not maximizing your output. When that research was done, that was like 2016, 2017. So there were a couple of numbers that a model was done to be based on. So we had at that point, 2017, we had a tech as a share of the GDP approximately 5%. And in the best case, in order for us to get out of this kind of consumption-oriented kind of circle with a lot of external debt and so on, we would need to get to approximately 11% of GDP of tech. And then we'd also need the tech employee side, we would have to go from 18,000 to 37,000. So just to look back like 7 years, what has happened and what would be the model say that what needs to happen. I kind of double check the numbers updated. Right now we have approximately 7% of GDP. So 7% of the output in Armenia comes from tech. And we also have approximately 34,000 employees in Armenia that work in tech. Now, a third of that is foreign citizens, which means basically Russians that have come to Armenia and work from Armenia. So we are moving in the right direction. And this a couple of charts, what would happen on the GDP side, on the debt side, so the debt would start going down and so on. I also looked at a couple of numbers recently, did a bit of like number crunching. who do you think produces, as a country, where does GDP per capita higher, in Germany or Israel? Any idea? Yeah, Israel. It was a huge surprise for me. I thought Germany was far ahead. Israel was basically like very, very agriculture oriented some 20, 25 years ago. Their growth in GDP has been exponential after the internet times. So basically, the Israeli economy produces much more output per person than the German does. And this is because of the tech orientation and innovation that has taken place. Now you can say, well, this is Israel and so on, but if you look at Estonia, Estonian numbers are as impressive. Estonian numbers they have the highest like startup value per capita. And they're like 1.5 million people. So this is what tech can do. And this is what has happened in other countries. So most of this research here, or the numbers, is basically comparative. It's not saying this is good, this is bad. It's basically, okay, what has this country done and what has that country done? Okay, so what do we have right now in Armenia? Where have we come over the last 10 years, 15 years? And a lot of people here have been very helpful to help us in that direction. This is the exports GDP, and this is the exports of IT tech services in Armenia. So basically exponential. These are the type of companies that we have in Armenia today. There is no other sector in Armenia that has this type of companies present and operating in the country. This level of international leading companies in the world. If you might say, like, if Taiwan is a chip production center, Armenia is a bit of a small, a mini tech design, a chip design center with Synopsys, with NVIDIA, with AMD, and all of these. So none of these companies produce hardware, to my knowledge, but a lot of them do chip design. Whether this is Siemens, Synopsys, NVIDIA, and National Instruments as well. So there are no companies of this magnitude in Armenia today, in other sectors, so to say. This is also a very kind of updated chart, also very interesting. Again, everything is relative. This is the market share of Armenian tech versus global tech exports and versus global exports in general. So if you take Armenian exports of tech divided by total global exports of tech, this is what you see. What you also see is, you divide the same tech exports from Armenia on global GDP, tech exports, and stuff like that, global GDP as well. So Armenia is also taking market share when it comes to tech and IT. Now, there are a lot of caveats. There are a couple of issues I mentioned, for example, foreign labor power and so on. But these trends have been around for several years now. And what wasn't around was a lot of the talent investment, and I'll go to that as well. Now, a lot of this that we talked about is economics. A lot of things on our mind today, as Mark mentioned as well, is security issues, right? Security, sustainability. And this next chart is very interesting. The security comes from the fact, so a lot of the tech that we have right now in Armenia, it's moving in, it's kind of getting more sophisticated, but a lot of tech right now is based on the outsourcing model. So Armenia produces a lot of stuff for foreign companies, and basically a lot of outsourcing. Which is perfectly fine. Every single country starts with outsource. You cannot start producing products if you don't know what the customer needs. So all countries start with outsourcing, whether this is China, whether this is any Eastern European country, whether this is Singapore, everyone started with outsource. What needs to happen now, and I'll come back to the security issue, is the leveling up of these three things: innovation, science, and R&D. At that point, we move from IT tech outsource to more kind of higher value add. This is also a very important chart. This is it's not my statistics. This was done by Bridgewater Associates. Ray Dalio, you probably recognize his name. They basically looked at countries over 500 years, 1,000 years, and studied how do countries become rich, strong, and successful. Okay? And they looked at different factors here, different perspectives. So you have the perspective. Now you have the aspects there. You have the education, the tech, innovation. You have the competitiveness. You have the military, reserve status, financial center. So they looked at all of these. UK, France, Portugal, Netherlands, all of these large countries that became really kind of leading countries in the world. And what happened is, so where do you think a country starts to get ahead? To basically to guarantee that leads to to competitiveness, to economics. Where do they start? What does a country need to do first and second? Yeah, let's start.
I was going to say education.
Education, and then what? Any other takers? What does a country need to do to get ahead competitively on economics and then on everything else? So this is education. So the blue line is basically the leading indicator of everything else. So it's education, and the second thing needs to be innovation and technology, the red line. Only after that do things like defense, do things like economic competitiveness, productivity, everything else comes from there. So a country needs to do those things first and then move to the other stuff. So this is, and also by the way, if you look at the defense, where do we have the military, the red, the orange line comes very close after the innovation and tech. Okay. Any questions, comments on this? Does this make sense? Okay, so I mentioned that we need to kind of move. From the IT outsource model to more product innovation, because that's where we get to that other line, to the red line that did the innovation and technology. And what's needed for that is more science, more education investment, and also increased access to finance. Innovation basically takes place between the human labor, but also you need to finance that innovation. And the finance is also important in this context. So, and that's where we come to startups. So it's a key shift from product-based tech. So a lot of IT companies in Armenia are shifting towards product. And for this product, you obviously need to have investment, and that's how the startups are born. And private spending on innovation, there's the two types of innovation spending. One is obviously the most important one is startups, and the other one is like other companies doing R&D. And as mentioned there, it's very adjacent to national security. We had one startup, for example, that started from hardware. That team afterwards transitioned to doing, let's say, AI-based defense tech. Shifting a bit to the finance side, how much capital is financing innovation tech startups today? So if this is a function, if innovation is a function of tech, innovation is a function of sciences and capital, like you have the VC industry in US, you have the California, all the universities. How much money do you think in Armenia is going towards startups and innovation technology? Any idea?
As a percentage?
As a percentage, yeah. Like high, low? 5%? 1%? Actually, we did a calculation on this. This is the number we got to. If you take all of the money in Armenia, financial assets, the banking system, the pension fund system, the investment companies, the insurance companies, all of these financial assets that we have, and you take the money that goes into Armenian innovation startups, that's the number we get. And by the way, half of the number comes from where? Diaspora. Maybe more than half, actually. And that's 1/25 of best practice. So somebody mentioned 1%. US, Israel, Estonia, these type of countries do 1.5% in VC. Okay? VC money, venture finance money. So this is the number that goes into Armenian innovation technology startups. Where is the money actually going? Where? Construction is one thing. Other ideas? If the country is very consumption oriented, where does the money go? If you look at the bank balance sheets, what do we find? Restaurants. Yeah, this is basically what we have. So you have two exponential charts. So this is the bank loans. How much money from the bank? So banks are transition mechanism. We give money, we give our savings to the banks, and they give loans, right? Where do the loans go? That's the chart over there. the chart on the left. We have two exponential charts here. One's at construction, so I don't know, can I climb up the stage? The one that goes like this, the exponential one, is mortgages, mortgage credit. And the one that is dotted is consumer credit. So the finances that we have are not used well. You know, consumption credit is not, most of the consumption credit goes abroad. You know, more BMWs, more, you know, trips to whatever country, tourism and things like that. So the finances that we have is not used that well. This one shows the pension fund asset distribution. And basically, what do the pension funds do with their money? Cash and bank deposits, so they give to the banks and the banks give to whatever they do. We do have the government bonds, that's the very big chunk of the gray. We do some corporate bonds, and we do some, I don't know, pooled investments, which basically means ETFs, index funds abroad. So we have a financial system that's not that diversified, so to say, and we have a financial system that's not optimized to build the kind of future that we want to have. That's kind of secure, because we that much, some of that money at least, we're not saying, it's not, the banks will never start giving money to startups, that's what they're supposed to do. Pension funds have started actually, which is a commendable thing, to invest in Armenia VC funds, which is good. That's great. That was a recent move that they did. But basically right now we have a financial sector that's not promoting as well as it could be the sustainability and the security side that was mentioned. Are Armenian startups worth investing in? Any positive, negative takes on this? How can we interpret this question? Does anyone know Armenian startups? No? Yeah, you probably heard of several. So these are the type of companies, these are the US VC fund mostly, US VC funds that invest in Armenian startups. The same way I mentioned that no other sector that has as good of an international, highest quality companies in Armenia apart from tech. There are no investors, international, global investors that are investing in Armenia the same way the VC funds do. So these are like Sequoia, Bessemer, T. Rowe Price, Menlo, Sierra, and others. So this is another kind of another way to put it, that this is a sector that has a lot of success because there's a lot of foreign money backing it. These are the startups that you know most of them. There are many more coming because a lot of top talent. I probably missed a couple of initiatives here as well. That export chart of Armenian tech, a lot of that stuff happened before these initiatives were born. Before Tumo, before Epic, before FAST, before Armenian Code Academy, Armat of UAT, and others. So all of that progress that we've seen was based on things before this was available. So that's how we're thinking about the outlook. So both on the talent side and the capital side, we have a lot of progress. So these are the funds that we have, the VC funds that we have in Armenia. These are the angel networks that we have. I'm sure you know some of the names. There's a lot of very good work done by the ecosystem in general, and these are some of the players that help out with that. And I also wanted to kind of give a couple of minutes to introduce what we also do to kind of be helpful in this direction. And this is, as Mark mentioned as well, this is kind of a research project that was born at Epic AUA. It was a fairly large study conducted by Dartmouth College. They're MBA students that did a lot of analysis, international, but also in Armenia's ecosystem to try to understand what needs to be done in Armenia as well. So that research culminated in something called Equify. And Equify basically is an initiative. If we have a lot of angel investors, we have several VC funds, those investors and VC funds work with high net worth individuals. So a lot of fairly successful, rich people, entrepreneurs, business people, and others. This initiative tries to broaden the base, tries to make sure everybody participates. If there are US VC funds or large Armenian investors or diaspora investors investing here, and there's a lot of value added, why shouldn't like a common man, so to say, in diaspora, Armenia participate in this as well. So this is basically an initiative where we have the same startups that large investors invest in, but basically opening up the access. So this is an investment platform where people can invest $25 and upwards in some of the best Armenian startups that we have. And why do we think this is important? Besides the fact that this is like promoting innovation and technology, this is also important for several reasons, and there's a lot of impact in Armenia proper. So one thing, I mentioned the new startup finance channel. That's very important. We need to get above that 0.06%. That's just not enough, and that's not the future that we'll need to have. The other thing is, of course, this consumption to savings and investment culture. Now, there's a lot of times we had discussions, oh, Armenians, well, they don't save and so on. Well, they don't know much about investing and so on. We need to kind of make sure that people have the information how these three things are connected: the savings, the investments, and the future. There's a kind of a taboo in Armenia to save. It's like socially, like not a very accepted, not a very welcome thing to do, to save. And we kind of working on it. If you visit any of our SMM, like LinkedIn, Instagram, you'll see that there's a lot of content provided for people to do this properly, long term, and we're always saying that you should not invest like more than 5 or 10% of your money into Armenian startups, given the risk. But there needs to be all of this content creation, all of this investment sophistication that people have, that people need to make sure we move from the consumption to the investment side. And the third point is also very important. Early adopters of innovation and technology. Why is that important? If a country becomes an early adopter of innovation technology, what happens if a country is kind of more technologically progressive, technologically savvy? If people have skin in the game and they invest in their startups. I'll give you another kind of example I heard recently, which was a bit of shocking to me, but anyhow. So why is this third point important? So, yeah.
Start like producing with like that tech that we adopt, and start creating products and exporting that.
So if you take that's part of it. If you take a look at any country, there's basically a chart that goes like this. You have the you have the innovators first, then you have the early adopters, then you have the early majority, then you have the late majority, and then the conservatives and the pessimists. So basically, if a society becomes an early adopter of technology, that means they start adopting technology, and the society and the country as a whole becomes more competitive. People use and businesses use technology to become more productive, and the businesses become more productive. So if people have skin in the game, so to say, people understand how important and start participating in this story that we have here, they will basically be more proactive when it comes to other aspects of life and other parts of the economy. So this third point is also very important. And then I'm going to conclude with diaspora. A couple of points why this might be interesting, or this should be interesting for diaspora as well. So I lived, I know, half of my life almost in Sweden and US. For me, it's very important that Armenia also we start taking responsibility in Armenia as well over the finances in this direction too. But it's also very important, so we start ourselves to saving and investing in our future in Armenia. But also, this is also important for the diaspora side. First of all, this is a kind of sustainability issue. So Armenia, in this direction, if we start aiding and participating in investing, it will become a more sustainable economic model. It's also very important to make sure that after a lot of years, like 30 years of diaspora participating, helping out financially in other ways, we want to make sure that diaspora starts to get some value out of Armenia, apart from the emotional and the tourism side. We want to make sure people here get a share of the value and the profits that created in Armenia. I think that's time we kind of open that up, and so these value transfers two ways. And the fourth point here is all of these startups that you saw, most of them are founded or co-founded by diaspora Armenians. like if you look at the names, who are the people behind them. But most of the time, even if they are abroad, most of the time they set up operations in Armenia. There's a lot of circulation of knowledge, circulation of experience. So for that reason, we think this is a very important for diaspora to participate in as well. So the Equify is back. We have a lot of very experienced, very strong people joining us. We have a very large board. We have a lot of advisors. We just recently also, let me put that slides. You might recognize some of the names here. People from the VC space, people from a lot of angel investing background. We have people from basically many places in the world, from New York to Boston to France to Abu Dhabi to Armenia, Lebanon, UK, and a lot of advisors. And we recently got a license from the Central Bank of Armenia. We'll be registering this initiative also with the SEC. We're going to start that process with FINRA as well. That might take some time. We're going to be launching the initiative in autumn. If you're an accredited U.S. investor, you can start to participate immediately, so to say. If you're an Armenian passport, that should also be okay. That should be okay. The only ones that have a kind of a problem to participate at launch will be Armenian U.S. non-accredited investors. But we're going to solve that issue as well. It's a very highly regulated, very well kind of overseen initiative. We've done a lot of work in this direction and continue to do that. But basically, if you think this is a good thing we're doing, feel free to leave your email on that website. It's not public yet. You can leave your email to get newsletters every second month. You can also follow us on LinkedIn to get some updates what's going on. So, anyhow. Any questions, comments? Yeah.
Can I take the mic 1 second? Just for those online, again, please use the Zoom Q&A to submit your questions. And those of you here, please, if you're able to, I think everybody's able to, get up and come to the microphone so that the people online can hear you. And while people are thinking, actually, there is a question from online, and I will ask that one first. Can you please reflect on historical, I guess this was mentioned maybe before, historical Armenian business and or merchant acumen, and what, if any, bearing that has on today? Does the legacy, the history of Armenian merchant success over the centuries have any connection to or bearing on today's situation in Armenia?
That's a very sophisticated question for me to answer. I looked at the last 25, 30 years since 1990. I didn't go back. I'm not an economic historian. I've been mostly in finance and macroeconomics and investment finance. So unfortunately, I will not be able to answer that question, other than it would be like qualified guess, but I'm not sure how qualified that guess would be. So IT tech and the last 30 years, I can have a fairly good understanding of that, but not that, not going back more than that.
I have a question. I'll just speak up.
Yeah, I can requote your.
Question is like, what do you get like say like a person invests through the platform? It's a platform.
Yes,
like,
yes, that's
so
right.
A person invests like through a platform, say like $1,000. What do you get in return, and how, like, I guess safe it is? Like, just explain the process. Like, what would happen like if I just put my card into the platform? Like, what's the next step?
Okay, very good. Thank you, Victor. So this is, I'm sure you have your Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, whatever you're using. It's basically the same type of platform. You go in and you can pick. We're going to have very, very few, not few, I mean like 5 to 8 startups listed per year. As I mentioned, we want to have the same startups that large investors invest in. So there's not going to be, 30 different companies for you to choose and pick and choose from, just because we don't have that many. So per year, maybe 5, 7, 8 startups per year. You will be able to pick and choose whichever you find, whichever you like, so to say, the same way you have an investment platform. There's also a much better product, I would say, which is basically a subscription one, which basically if you kind of subscribe $100 every month, that money gets automatically allocated across the startups that are listed. The startups that are listed, apart from the same ones that large investors invest in, we have a listing committee consisting of these people you saw there, VC experience, angel investor experience, 5 people that participate in due diligence and the listing decisions. So if you subscribe, you're going to basically get access to Armenian ecosystem as opposed to 1 or 2 startups. The way to do this correctly is to do this the same way the VCs do, and then have a portfolio of 20, 30 different startups. That way, some of them will succeed, a lot of them will not, but at least you'll get a decent return. And decent return, we're aiming for something between 15 to 30% annually, but obviously there are kind of long holding periods, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. But that's the same standards as the VC and venture finance in general. So I hope on the liquidity side, holding periods are long, but the risks are higher than the usual stocks you buy in the stock market. On the other hand, the returns will be commensurately high to manage to compensate for the risk taken and compensate for the liquidity issues. I'll give you one example. Via AICA, this is the large group of investors that we have. One of our angels invested in one of the startups, let's say $1, and got 40 back within 3 years. So this is the structure of the returns in the industry. It's not a bond where you get like 5% every year. You do 20, 30 investments, 25 of them do not make anything, a couple of them make the money back, and 1 or 2 of them become, I don't know, service titan or something similar. And that way you get, I don't know, 200 times the money back, 100 times the money back, 50 times the money back. So that's kind of there are specifics to this industry, but we're trying to do this as closely to professional investment as possible. Other comments, questions? Okay. So the sophistication, so the question is about sophistication. Yeah. So the question is about, okay, how do we select which companies we're going to have there? There's a couple of criteria. One, there has to be large investors having backed the company prior to us listing. Large investors means VC funds, US or Armenia VC funds, professional investors. Large investors also mean sophisticated angel investors, people that have invested, evaluated maybe even hundreds of companies. So this is the first requirement. The second requirement is obviously our due diligence and the listing committee that will maybe making the decision which startup to list and which one is not to list. And the third one is also how much value does that startup add to Armenia. There's an economic theory, which I'm kind of a fairly big fan of. The more different Lego bits and pieces you have, the more complex products you can make as a country. The more similar these Lego pieces look, the more basic products do you get. So if there's a startup that adds functionalities and capabilities to Armenia, Armenia can do more sophisticated and more innovative products. Like, for example, this computer, you have a lot of stuff in it, chips and metals and, I don't know, plastics and so on. Now, the more of this stuff that's inside we can produce in Armenia, the higher likelihood we'll be able to produce the computer. So these capabilities we need to build in Armenia as well, and we'll be taking a look at those capabilities too. What startup adds what kind of new capabilities to Armenia?
Another online question, which I'll summarize, even though we were going to steer clear of geopolitics. Can you comment on the impact of geopolitical fears, security concerns on investor confidence, I guess, or the willingness of investors to invest in Armenian startups?
Yes, obviously when there's a lot of uncertainty, the investment propensity usually goes down. I'll mention 2 things, good or bad. Depends how you interpret it. Most of these companies that we saw on the slides, and likely most of these companies that we will be investing in, are Delaware registered startups. The same way any global promising startup does, the same way do our startups. They register in US for legal issues. That's because that's how the industry operates. So most of the investments will be actually in our American registered, US registered companies. There's also a nuance there, so something called an SPV. We cannot put 1,000 people into a startup's cap table. 1,000 people cannot start participating directly in a startup. So what happens in the industry is basically they use something called a special purpose vehicle. These special purpose vehicles, I'm sorry to go into the technicals here, these special purpose vehicles with time will also be US oriented, US based, because of the SEC, because of the FINRAs and all of that. So while some of these startups have operations in Armenia, on the legal side, most of them will be US affiliated, if not US registered. So for US diaspora investors, this adds several layers of security, so to say. And then then you might ask a question, okay, if something happens, what happens to the founders? What happens to the teams of these startups? Well, I'll leave that judgment for these teams and founders to make. Whether they should be staying in Armenia, because that's the value they're adding is important for Armenia. But on the legal side, at least, that's how it looks on the jurisdictions. I hope that was understandable.
Has the corruption situation improved in Armenia in the last several years?
Yeah, don't need for me to requote that question. So I'm not going to make a judgment on that. It's like I'm not a lawyer or a legal expert on those matters. I work in the IT tech and venture finance, so allow me to steer clear of that too. Sorry about that. Anything else? Any other questions online or in person? Yes, Victor. Yes, Victor. Yeah, that's okay. No. Oh. No, I mean, it's the same. I mean, if you go in and to invest in Tesla or a Google or a Facebook, whatever, company of your liking, you can go and, participate in annual shareholders meetings maybe if you really want to do that. I hope, I'm guessing they have a channel for that. But our approach is more or less the similar. If you really want to kind of participate in the shareholder meetings, maybe there will be a chance to do that. But most of the people, I think, will be, will not have time to do that for like $25 or $500 even. But we will be definitely organizing, conference calls, things like that with the startup founders. So the investors will also kind of learn to know who these people, who the founders are. So the difference between the angel side and the platform side is, as an angel, if you're high net worth and you can invest, let's say, $10,000 into a startup, because that's where the ticket sizes start. The difference is, as an angel, you have far more access to the founders. They are obviously for 10,000. They are allocating more time to meeting the investors, talking to them. We'll be having some of those opportunities via the platform too, but I'm guessing as an angel investor, you have much more access to the founders, to put it that way. Yeah, I'm not sure how we're running on time.
We're doing fine, but let me just conclude then by reading you one comment from online, that this was one of the best presentations organized by NAASR that I've attended during the past year. So congratulations. And certainly thank you for speaking. For those of you who are here, there are refreshments, and please, if you have other questions and comments you want to bring to Samson's attention, chat with him. There's ample opportunities to do so, and for those online, thank you again for joining us. And Thank you to First Armenian Church, to the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation for supporting our contemporary programs, and for the other groups and entities that participated and supported this program. And that, most of all, thank you, Samson.